access to adequate housing remains a challenge 30 years into democracy. Section 26 of the Constitution places an obligation on the state to provide access to adequate housing, but the state does not often fulfill this obligation for a number of reasons, including corruption in the allocation of subsidised housing. Now, let's look at the challenges and possible solutions to the housing crisis in South Africa. We're now joined by Professor Amira Osman, a Professor of Architecture at the Tshwane University of Technology and General Secretary of Abahlali, baseMjondolo, Thapelo Mohapi. Very good afternoon to you both, and thank you so much for your time. Prof, perhaps let's start with you. You know, human settlements is one of government's 14 key priorities in its National Development Plan 2030 vision. 30 years on, how would you then characterize just government's, access or provision to provide access to adequate housing?
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the invitation to discuss this important topic, which always becomes even more important as we approach election time. I would assess the 30 years as being largely disappointing. There have, of course, been successes. We can't deny that. But the structure of our cities has not changed in any major way. The day-to-day lives of many people have not been improved for the better. So it means that we have a lot of concepts that actually are excellent on paper, but they have not been translated into the lived realities of many people. I think it was in 2004 when the name of the department was changed from housing to human settlements. But up until today, in 2014, I don't think that we have actually grasped what human settlements means. In my mind, housing is the product. It's the house plus the process, which is participatory, inclusive, provides income-generating opportunities. It's also the space in between the buildings and all the supporting amenities and services that go with it. Now, if you provide only one element of that equation, which is a house unit, that means you have not provided adequate housing. So we really need to finally make that distinction between housing and human settlements. But even then, if we look just at the house unit, we are still failing to deliver that. So there's many challenges that need to be addressed.
Thapelo, let me bring you in. I mean, part of the Constitution, if you look at Section 26, also says no one may be evicted from their home or have their home demolished without an order of the court made considering all the relevant circumstances. No legislation may permit arbitrary evictions. It also says that the state must take reasonable legislative and other measures within its available resources to achieve the progressive realization of the right to access adequate housing. I mean, you fought for access to adequate housing for years now as an organization, just going into this crucial election. And as we reflect on the 30 years of democracy, where do you think government has failed?
Thank you very much, Nati. To us as Abahlali baseMjondolo, it is 30 years of shame, 30 years of landlessness, 30 years of houses not being provided. And part of that crisis has been the corruption that has been taking place within government. We have seen brutal evictions that have been taking place, sometimes at gunpoint in this province in particular. We have seen that the current government have become law unto themselves. The court order and approaching courts has not been the process that has been followed by the government. And we have seen massive evictions, reminiscent to the apartheid era. And we have seen councillors who are not supposed to be allocating houses, which is a job of the officials of the municipality. But we have seen councillors getting involved, selling houses that are meant for the impoverished to people who can pay bonds, who are not qualified to be in these houses. Yes, of course, I must agree, houses have been built over the years since 1994, but who lives in those houses? And the other thing has been the location of these houses. I mean, you look at Cape Town, for instance, people have been allocated to Vorderefir, which is 60 kilometers away from the opportunities. And when you speak about human settlements, we speak about the location of the house, where there's economic hub, where people can find jobs, opportunities. And when government provide these houses, they provide them and relocate people far away in the peripheries where people are unable to get these opportunities. And it's the same thing that the apartheid government has done to move those who were black away from the cities. But this time around, a black government is moving the impoverished people away from the cities, away from the opportunities.
And Prof, how do we then begin to encourage developments that incorporate affordable housing? I mean, I'm listening to what Thapelo is saying and yourself in terms of just, the apartheid era times, so to speak. How do we do this by, elevating equity, access and dignity, just given the spatial realities that exist even today because of, the apartheid government's deliberate planning of the time? How then do we then start to talk about, encouraging developments that incorporate affordability in terms of these houses?
Thank you so much, and thank you, Thapelo, for your contribution. Thank you, Onati, for the question. The issue of location is incredibly important. There are so many opportunities to deliver affordable housing in inner city areas. We have become aware in the last few years of people that have lived in occupied buildings in inner city Johannesburg, as an example, for 20 plus years. They've been there for a long time. Some of these communities are incredibly well organized. Why can't government funding, as one example, be directed towards supporting those communities? That is one issue to be considered. So the location issue is incredibly important. I also mentioned earlier that housing does not necessarily imply just the house. Housing is multi-family, multi-story, multifunctional structures catering for diverse income levels. Why, when we have known this for so many years, are we still unable to translate this into reality on the ground? I also don't believe that the housing problem is just a problem for the poor. For me, it is thinking about integrated settlements where people inhabit the same places, have access to the same high quality services and infrastructure. It is incredibly unfortunate that we still think of housing for the poor as being geographically located away from the rest of the city. So these are issues that we really need to seriously consider, and there needs to be the political will to make it a reality, because we know what the solutions are.
And I want to come back to that, Prof, in as far as solutions are concerned, especially as it relates to political will. But Thapelo, let me ask you then, I mean, how would you define a human settlement, in this country that would work, for the people of this country in as far as creating and becoming a gateway, for job creation, for social cohesion, and also for equity?
Yes, human settlements, because we must not look at a structure as a house, but it must have skills development, skills transfer, and it must also be an asset for the people that are going to benefit out of it. But the most crucial thing, and I think as we come to the solution, is that the government sees people as recipients, passive recipients, people that need to just be given houses. You need to accept it. It doesn't matter where it is because it's free of charge. Take it. We are doing you a favor. But there needs to be a meaningful engagement with the people on the ground so that people become part of the development that takes place. I will be very proud if I get a skill and build the house that I live in and have contributed and made my contribution. It doesn't mean because I'm poor and therefore I cannot think and somebody must think on my behalf and hire a consultant, somebody who lives in the suburb who does not know the conditions that we are living under. And if you look at informal settlements anywhere else, they are strategically built next to transport access, next to the hub where there are factories and businesses, so that people can walk to factories, so that people can access transport easily. But when you move them away, you are taking that away from it. And there's always been a complaint from government that we build houses for people and people come back to live in the informal settlement. And the reason is that they don't look all of this, that it must be an economic opportunity for the people who are there. There must be school for children. There must be access to transport for those who want to be near to the workplace, and so that they can access that. And those are some of the things that government should look at. But you can only understand that if people become part of their own development and you meaningfully consult and speak to the people on the ground.
Professor Osman, as we wrap, I want to go back to the point that you raised earlier in terms of political will. And I mean, just when we look at some of the plans that government has had in place in the NDP, as an example, and we track the progress that has been made, where do you think the shortfall is? And how do we quickly make sure that we bridge that gap to make sure that these, priorities are identified very quickly and also are implemented ahead of the 2030, deadline?
I believe that the problem is there's a discrepancy between what we have sometimes in policy and in our plans. You mentioned the National Development Plan, and in terms of what happens with officials and in the minds of officials, there's a discrepancy there. So, for example, I 100% agree with Thapelo. I believe that informality is a great indicator of where housing needs to be located. But we have this very uncomfortable relationship between authority and informality. I also believe that people's rights to housing needs to be better developed for both South Africans. Thapelo mentioned the problem with evictions, but also to accommodate for migrants and non-documented foreign nationals. We really need to innovate there. I truly believe that the measures of success are not numbers in terms of housing units or housing opportunities, as we say now, but the measures of success are access to education, services, healthcare, and to what extent we are creating safe and integrated environments. Thank you.
Thapelo, as Abahlali baseMjondolo and going into the elections, which party, as you look at, some of those manifestos, really speaks to the heart of solving this housing crisis that we are currently experiencing?
Yes. Well, as Abahlali baseMjondolo, of course, it's in the open now that we will be lending our vote to the economic freedom fighters. Basically because their manifesto straightforward speaks to the land issue and of course to the decent housing, because access to land is very important for us as it speaks to housing and the allocation of those. And of course, we know that manifestos are just manifestos sometimes, but the fact that it's there in the Economic Freedom Fighters manifesto, we're going to try and push for them to actually push what is in their manifesto to be implemented. But we know for the fact that we need to vote as the poorest of the poor, because it's a right that was fought for by our ancestors. But there is no political party that has the will at the moment to deliver land, to deliver adequate housing for the poor and marginalized in this country.
All right, let me thank you both for your time. Really do appreciate it. Professor Amira Osman there, of course, and Thapelo Mohapi from Abahlali baseMjondolo. Of course, we continue to have these discussions around various issues affecting South Africans as we head to the elections.